I'm probably going to go to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
Okay, that's where I went as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for the first part of my schooling, yes.
Where'd you go after that?
Came back to the University of Chattanooga and married my wife.
Oh. There you go.
Alright, so I guess we should just state the basics of the interview. So, the date and the place. Right, so it's March 1st, 2013. This is at Mr. Jim Wade's home. Okay. So I guess let's just start off with the basics. So which branch of service were you involved with? It was the
U.S. Army,
right?
Yeah, U.S. Army.
United States Army. What was your rank in the Army, and what was your division within the?
Well, my assignment was Air Defense Artillery, and started out as a second lieutenant, as a tactical director in an Air Defense Command post, and later moved to a battery commander's position in the headquarters battery. And my rank was first lieutenant.
So did you where exactly did you serve while you were?
Fort Bliss, Texas is the home of the Air Defense Artillery in El Paso, Texas, which is Fort Bliss, located in El Paso, and that's where the Army Air Defense is located. And later on, Northern Ohio, I was in the Nike Hercules missile unit. These are surface-to-air missiles that were used to counter in the '60s Soviet bomber threat. And so we had firing units around Lake Erie for threats from the north that we used to intercept we would have used to intercept Soviet bombers. We had 3 firing units and then a headquarters unit with the ADCAP, Air Defense Command Post in it. So I spent my time there.
So when you first decided to join the military, did you decide to enlist, or what sort of helped you decide to become involved
I
with the military?
went through ROTC at university, and so when I graduated I became a second lieutenant. I decided early on I wanted to be in the military, so served my country.
At what age did you kind of decide that you wanted to do the ROTC program? Really early?
Probably, yeah. Well, I graduated high school when I was 18, and so I already knew then, so it's probably a couple of years before that.
Did you have any family members?
Yes. I had 2 uncles who were in World War II, who were very active in the military, and then a cousin who was in the United States Marine Corps in the late 50s. And
so it's in your family pretty well.
It was, and it's mine, yes.
Where were you living at the time when you decided to enlist?
I was living at home in Chattanooga.
Oh.
So you were attending college at the same time, though?
Yeah. Well, what happens is in the state system, well, that was University of Chattanooga was a private school. University of Tennessee is a state school, and so they have to have ROTC in there. So the first 2 years when you're in university, Tennessee, you have to be in ROTC, either Air Force or Army, and then before you go into your junior year, you decide if you want to continue or not. And so I had already made the decision I wanted to continue regardless. So, and then when you graduate, you get your permission.
So how did you decide to be in the Air Defense Artillery program and everything?
It's one of the combat branches. There are several. There's the infantry, the artillery, armor, and so that was my pick, was artillery, and it wound up the Army assigned me to the Air Defense Artillery, which is there's tube artillery, which is like cannons, and then there's the missiles, which is the air defense, which is for surface-to-air missiles. So you do what they tell you after that.
So you're talking about how you sort of have to choose while you're in the ROTC program between the different services. So why did you choose specifically the branch that you?
It was a combat arm, and I wanted to be in a combat arm, and this one attracted me because of you don't don't know if you're going to get missiles or two, but I was interested in the missiles. I mean, that was a very, in the early 60s, that was a big thing then. It was something fairly new and advanced with computer technology, etc. So, though the calculator you had in your hand there, the photo, was probably more powerful than some of the computers we had at the time.
And so what was the training like?
Well, first of all, you have to go in your early years in college, between your junior and senior year, you have to go to an ROTC summer camp, and I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is the home of the infantry, and you have to spend 8 weeks there in the summer camp, getting the basics of the military, what you'd call basic training, along with some leadership training they give you, because you're going to be an officer when you graduate. So that was the initial experience, and then you learn how to. You already know how to march because you've been in ROTC, but you get some specific tactics training as well as physical training. And then when you graduate, then you have already chosen your basic service, which in my case was air defense. So you go to the Army installation that teaches that technology to the officer corps. In this case, it's Fort Bliss. And so there you spend roughly 3 months learning your basic criteria for that particular branch, becoming qualified for missiles, basically.
So what sort of made the training a unique experience? Like, what did it feel like to go through those programs?
Well, it was very interesting. I mean, if you're interested in the military, I like the military style life, and again, it was missiles. They were just moving from Nike Zeus missiles to Nike Hercules, which is a very advanced missile that the warhead on that missile, it can be conventional or it can be nuclear, and so it's kind of exciting in that regard, and so it was. I enjoyed it. The most difficult thing probably was, at that time I got married my senior year in college, and so I had to leave my wife behind while I was at Fort Bliss, and so that was the most difficult thing.
Were you able to keep in touch with her while you were training?
By letters, mostly. The cell phones did not exist then, so
yeah.
And it's kind of expensive to make calls. I occasionally would make a call, mostly by letters.
So you were gone 3 months straight?
Yeah. And then after that, then you're assigned to your unit. You don't know where you're going to go until several weeks before you finish your officer basic course. And then I had signed up for Germany, and instead they put me in Northern Ohio.
Small difference.
Yeah, slightly.
So was the training similar to what you experienced when you were in actual combat in war?
Well, in this case, fortunately we were not, because if we had gone into war, it would have been the United States would be under nuclear attack. So we were deployed against the Soviet bomber threat, because at that time ICBMs were just beginning, and the primary threat against the United States was Soviet bombers armed with nuclear bombs and then air-to-surface missiles.
So I mean, you were serving during around the mid-60s.
64, 65, and 66 active duty. Yeah.
So I mean, were you in service when they had developed ICBMs, or?
Yes, they were already developing them when I was in the service, and the next generation of missiles after the Nike Hercules was called the Nike Zeus, and so they were just starting to develop that was deployed against surface-to-surface missiles, ICBMs.
So this was around the time of like the Vietnam War.
Vietnam started in started in the early 60s, but it was just starting to heat up in 63 and 64. And so I had men transitioning through when I was headquarters, when I was battery commander, I had men who were coming back from Vietnam, as well as some who were transitioning to Vietnam.
So I mean, that's sort of a time period where you're not really, I guess, it's sort of a time period where the tensions with the Soviet Union and the United States are sort of, you're not sure where they're going. So did you ever feel nervous as working in the military during this time period, or?
No, I was doing my duty. Yeah. So that was a natural thing. The Soviets, that was called the Cold War era, with the Soviets, and of course the Vietnamese, North Vietnam was communist as well, and so that was part of what we thought was the domino theory then that was happening, where they would try to take over Southeast Asia and move on from there. They had already tried it in Korea in the 50s, as you're probably aware.
Now, is that why you were attracted to the military style life? Because you felt like it was your duty?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Do you like the organization?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I like the military style organization. It is very organized, top down. There's definitely a chain of command that you follow, more so than in industry today. I mean, it is more formal relative to, you know, everyone has rank. You know who has rank over you, and so you salute the proper person who's above you, etc. So it is a different world from civilian life.
Was there something about the time period specifically that sort of drew you to your duty? For example, the Cold War, or was there anything that really attracted you?
Well, contrary to today, you know, I grew up in the 40s and 50s, and so my uncles came back from World War II, and that was against the Nazis and the Japanese. So that was a threat. And then when I was 10 or 11, the Korean War began, and again, that was a threat against the United States, but via the communist invasion in Korea. And then in the 50s, we had the Soviets taking countries. The Iron Curtain was in effect there in Europe, and we knew there were threats against the United States, and so yes, I think a lot of people felt the obligation to serve their country. Freedom is not free. So we are an all-volunteer army now. Of course, at that time they still had the draft, and so whether or not you wanted to or not, unless you had a deferment, you were going to go into the military after you were 18. You had to be registered, and so a lot of men went in who did not necessarily want to go. They had no choice. It is an all-volunteer army now, so it is only by your choice that you go into the military. It was my choice early on, but a lot of people were drafted as enlisted men, and that's how that works, or how it worked through World War II and Korea and Vietnam.
Did you have any friends who were drafted, or
Yes.
any friends that also wanted to enlist?
Yes.
Do you feel like the majority was on your side, like wanted to fight in the war because it was their duty, or in reverse?
Well, in the 60s that was not true. There were some who protested the war very strongly and did not want anything to do with the military. I associated with people who did. My best friend, we graduated together from the University of Chattanooga. He went into the Marine Corps, not in the Army. He was killed in '67 in Vietnam in a helicopter. So most all my friends were in the military. So again, that's just kind of how you classify yourself after you make a commitment.
Right. So can you talk a little bit about like the pressures or the stress you had to deal with while you were there?
It's a great opportunity for a young man. The military is. It's especially even if you're an enlisted man, or especially if you're an officer, you get opportunities that you don't normally have for that age. I mean, when you're 20, 21, 22 years old, to have a command and then reporting to you and responsible for specific items that are of national importance when you're talking about weapon systems, etc. is a challenge and an opportunity, and I like it.
It's worth it.
Yes.
So, where exactly you were stationed in Ohio?
Just outside Cleveland, Ohio, along Lake Erie. That's along the Canadian borders. On one side is U.S., is Canada on the other side, and the Soviet bombers, should they have attacked the United States, would have come across Canada via the North Pole and would have intruded that way to bomb the United States, basically.
So really the position that you were in Ohio was the point at which like Soviet bombers would be
Well,
intercepted?
all along,
or-
actually we had Nike Hercules missile units around the entire United States, all along the northern border and along our coast in the northwest, as well as on the east coast areas. So.
Yeah. So were these missiles in silos, or were
Yes.
they? Okay.
Well, um, not silos as you think about for an ICBM, but
Yeah.
silos in that the launchers are below ground, and they have to be brought up above ground, and the missiles raised and fired. So they don't launch out of the silo; they brought to the surface and launch from the surface.
Okay, so they're just stationed in military bases around
Yes.
the Great Lakes area.
Well, the Great Lakes as well as along our coastline.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the coastline along
California. Along
and-
Massachusetts, all along the coast where you have the ocean. Again, the bombers, how they could and would have attacked would have been in several ways, but they would have to come from the north, but they would fly over they would rather not overfly the United States. They're going to attack San Francisco. They want to come around from a sea approach. So there were a number of missile units around San Francisco, for example. Same thing for Seattle, and then all along across the northeast part of the United States.
So it was sort of aimed at protecting individual cities and regions.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Were you still in? When was the Bay of Pigs invasion?
That was before.
That was before.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was at university when that happened. That would have been Bay of Pigs was in. President Kennedy was president. I think it was in '62.
I mean, that was a time where like missile defense would have been very important.
Well, we were invading them; they were not
Yeah.
invading us.
Right.
And so, actually, we were not. We were using guerrillas that we had trained to invade Cuba.
I'm sorry, I meant the Cuban Missile Crisis.
The Cuban Missile Crisis occurred
Crisis.
before I went in the military. That was in '63.
Yeah.
And 62, '63, and so yes, we had missile units deployed at that point. Both Hawk missile units. There are two different types of surface to air missiles. There's the high altitude missiles, which are used against bombers. That's the Nike Hercules. And then there's another type of missile called the Hawk, which is used against low flying aircraft. And so we had Hawk units deployed all along the Gulf Coast and the Gulf area there during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Did that at all influence your decision to join a missile?
No, I'd already made my mind up.
Yeah.
So while you were in Ohio, the kind of like the attitude of the U.S. was that did you all feel like truly threatened that the Soviet Unions were to bomb the U.S.?
Well, it was just a possibility. That was the Cold War again, and that was always, they were always making threats. You remember, you ever seen the picture of the movie of Khrushchev, who was one of the Soviet premiers, and he's in the United Nations. He's pounding the desk with his shoe, threatening the United States. And of course, when I went in '64, that was only a year or so after maybe a year or 2 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so there they tried to deploy intermediate range missiles. They didn't have real ICBMs effective like we did at that time. They used their bombers, but they did try to put intermediate range missiles in Cuba, which were nuclear tipped. And so that's why that was a huge crisis at the time. President Kennedy was a very stressful time for him. He did a good thing in putting the blockade out and stopping that, making them withdraw their missiles. I think in the Cold War era, it was that ended under President Reagan. He was actually his Star Wars concept financially broke the Soviet Union. They could not counter our counter, which was we were developing ICBM missiles ourselves, but also ways to shoot down their missiles. So that was the Soviet Union could not escalate financially to keep up with our technology, and so in the end, it broke the Soviet Union financially and militarily.
So, did you remember? I mean, you were out of the military by the time Reagan was around.
Certainly, that was in 1980.
Yeah. Like, what sort of like impressions of the Star Wars program did you have from working on, a missile?
Well, interestingly enough, at that time I was in industry and working in microelectronics, and so we were supplying some products that went into some of the Star Wars programs actually. So it was very exciting and very interested in doing it. I worked for a 3M company and then General Electric, and we supplied technical ceramics into the microelectronic industry, which in turn went into missile defense and the Star Wars programs actually. Some very innovative things that we were doing then.
So were you awarded any medals while you served?
Not really. I have a medal for missiles, which you receive after you go through officer basic school, and had a certificate of achievement that I received from the 31st Artillery Brigade when I left the military.
So, what influenced you to actually, how did your service for the military end?
Okay, fine. I finished active duty in '66, and then served in the reserve, inactive reserve until '69, when I received my honorable discharge.
So that was sort of the point at which you received these certificates.
When I left active duty, I received it. I can show that to you one. But anyhow, it was a nice thing on their part. And, back in those days, when you left the military, your unit also gave you a Zippo cigarette lighter with your name and the unit on it. That was always a prized possession. Yeah, I have that upstairs. I'll show it to you.
Yeah, sure.
Of course, that time they still, well, cigarettes were something that were used a lot in the military. Cigarettes and coffee.
Right.
During World War II, they used to put the cigarettes in the rations, actually, not the cigarettes.
Yeah.
So
So once you were discharged and finished with your active duty in '66, what did just your experience in the wars and everything inspire you to work in the microelectronics industry?
that was part of the reason. It did, yes. I'm an engineer by degree, but so I was destined to be in some sort of industrial thing. But that was interesting to me, in the microelectronics especially. That was the beginning of. We were just moving away from the transistor into integrated circuits at that time, and that was we still had transistors that we were using, and vacuum tubes. And now, I saw the integrated circuit from its beginning when Texas Instruments was a company that kind of came up with the integrated circuit, and so when it was just a small little circuit with nothing on it up until now, we have the huge microprocessor devices that you see. It's a computer on a chip, basically.
So this new technology was really intriguing and alluring to you.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a part upstairs. I'll show you. I kept one from and it is a defense part, and it was from about 2000 2001. It's actually used in a defense application.
Oh,
You want
that's
to see it?
cool.
I'll show you. It has a huge. It's called a multi-chip module. It has many chips on it, and it's a computer on a chip, basically.
Did any of the people you served with follow you into that industry?
No, we all went our separate ways. I kept track of some of the people after your friends,
Right.
mostly fellow lieutenants who either went on into as a career or into civilian life, and so we stayed in touch for a number of years. But then, they're not anywhere nearby, and so you kind of lose track of them over time. But I did for about 5 or 10 years, stayed in touch with some of the people.
Mm-hmm.
We all went through the same thing, so it's a neat thing when you can do that. You all share the same thing, and those who are mostly your lieutenants are all young married couples mostly, and so they're all going through the same thing together. So it's a lot of camaraderie there,
Oh yeah.
which is true in the military in general.
Do you remember much about your officers and what they were like?
Yes, very well.
What were they like? Do you have one that like sticks out to you?
Well, as a company commander, and I was a young company commander as a lieutenant, that's normally a captain's position. You have a battery that's underneath a company, and there are batteries, they call it in the artillery. So you've got maybe 140 or 160 men reporting to you. You have a first sergeant who is the non-commissioned officer in charge of all of the non-commissioned officers and enlisted men, and they're always very senior sergeants. First sergeant is the highest rank. Next rank would be a sergeant major, a command sergeant major. We also had one of those in the battalion. But at company level, the first sergeant, and my office, he was right outside my office in what they call the day room. And first sergeants are very colorful characters, and how can I say this? They use a lot of profanity that is just a common way in the military at that time, especially. So hearing that all day long, it was interesting, and I won't tell the whole story. Anyhow, yeah, Sergeant Finch. His name was Sergeant Finch, and he was quite a character. And my enlisted the sergeants I had as a company commander, a young company commander. I had your motor pool sergeant, the mess sergeant, and the supply sergeant are really important people that can keep you out of trouble.
Oh, okay.
And so that was a great lesson to me. You have to learn how to work with people, and these are people who don't have college education. They're enlisted men who've advanced up the rank of enlisted men. Very knowledgeable. They know what they're doing. And so it was a good lesson for a young man to learn that you have to learn how to work with people who have more knowledge than you in areas, certainly in all areas. But I enjoyed working with them.
So what other characteristics do you think you learned from serving?
I think the responsibility and having the responsibility for things that you would not normally have had in civilian life is a good thing. The military is serious. Industry is serious too, but in the military, you promise to do your duty to God and country. And so you can't have a much more serious obligation than that. You can't just quit if you get tired or don't like someone. So you are committed. So, and I think when you come into civilian life, then it's an advantage for you to have that. You've made that commitment, and so the loyalty that you have, the esprit de corps that you have in the military is a great thing. That's not true so much in business, but I think you can use that as you move into business. And in the military, you should lead by example. I think that serves you well in civilian life.
So, are there any really memorable experiences that you've had, just with the military, or is there anyone in particular that really stands out to you? Any memory?
Well, I've mentioned Sergeant Finch already, my first sergeant, but because the Vietnam War was going on and we were short of officers, when I was a second lieutenant, attack director, I took a position as a company commander, which was a captain's position. And so the operations officer for the battalion, Major Johnson, a very hardcore guy, kind of took me under his wing and taught me and showed me some things and kind of watched over me, as I had a lot of responsibility without a lot of knowledge. And so that stood out a lot, and I really appreciated him. He was a tough guy, but he really helped me out a lot. From an unusual standpoint, and this, You folks have heard of UFOs, haven't you?
Mhm.
In the missile unit, when I was in the battalion headquarters, what they call the ADCAP, Air Defense Command Post, you have large acquisition radars that sweep a really wide area of terrain and hundreds of miles that you're looking out, and then down you have 3 firing units who have target tracking radars and missile tracking radars, and they're the ones who fire the missiles off. And so one night I was on duty as a tank director, and I had a call from a firing unit down on Lake Erie at Rattenall's site, and they had been tracking something out over Lake Erie that was going exceedingly fast. It was not like an aircraft would normally go. And so they called me back, and they continued to track it. They would break lock. The radar would break lock on the track because it was moving so fast. So we acquired it with our acquisition radar where we could see it. And for probably over an hour and a half, we saw some things that you would not believe occurring, and we had to. Some of this is some things were classified back then, anyhow, they still are to some extent, but so you have to file reports and things up to the next higher sector. At that time, and we still do have sector control and the Air Defense Command, which is part of what they call Sync NORAD. It's changed somewhat now, but so yeah, you have to report this up, and it was a very unusual experience to have to report that incident. You watch TV, you'll see some things about UFOs now. Sometimes and some of them are nothing, but some of them could be something. You never know. We saw some interesting things.